Hey, I just saw on Facebook that your mom had died, so I just wanted to just send this to you to hopefully it's for a bit of comfort and encouragement. Um, Even though we're believers, we still feel the pain of a relative dying. But we want to remember that when the way we should think about death, believers should be thinking about death differently than unbelievers. We shouldn't have the same attitude towards it, even with a loved one, right? Because think of what Paul says: we shouldn't have no hope like the pagans, right? Because our hope isn't in this world. Our hope is basically it's for the next life, right? Think of what Paul said. He said, if Christ did not resurrect, then we are to be pitied more than all men because our faith would be in vain, right? Because we would be putting faith in somebody who actually didn't resurrect. But the resurrection is meant to give us comfort because of what Jesus will do with us when he returns. Okay, so this is not to lessen the pain that you're dealing with, but just as a reminder where your focus is to be. All right, so you don't lose focus on that. All right, because we can, and the devil's going to tempt us to, and our own flesh is going to get the better of us. So this is not meant for you not to deal with to just disregard any pain and suffering you have, or even to make you feel guilty of it, but just so that you remember where our hope is to be, so that as you're grieving, you keep this in mind also. Because think of how I'm just going to read a couple verses here for a few sections. And I know that my view of death changed. I remember when my cousin died, and she was about my age, and she lived with me growing up for a little bit. So she wasn't so much my cousin, she was a little more than my cousin. And I remember when she died, her now as a believer I can say this, and I know other believers can understand, and but maybe relatives or unbelievers may not understand, but her death really didn't bother me because we all have this, not that, so you hear me out. All right, it was like we have, like, there's a lot of doctrinal checklists we have, well, I believe this, I believe this. It's part of like a doctrinal checklist we have as believers. And one of them is that this life isn't the end. All right, but I knew the first time I knew this life wasn't the end was when my cousin died, because her death, so what I meant was her death didn't bother me at all. It wasn't that she died didn't bother me. Right away, I thought in my head, where is she? So her death, her physical death, was really an irrelevant issue for me because of the fact that I knew we go on after this life, right? It's not a theological concept for me, right? It's not a part of a doctrinal checklist. It's an actuality for me, and her death is really what exposed that for me, that I really did believe. It wasn't just part of a doctrinal belief I had. All right, I really did believe. I really knew at that point that we do go on, because my concern for her it wasn't even my grieving over her death. It was my wondering, where is she? Right? Because I know, like, when I would talk to her a lot about Christ, and I know towards the end, she started getting more and more interested, and I had told her a lot. So I don't know where she is right now, and I really hope she did get saved. I mean, I gave her enough information. I was grieved for a while because I didn't think I was. I remember I was like laying on the couch for like 3 days because I was so grieved. I wasn't sure if I told her enough. But I realize in hindsight now, any amount you give somebody, the Holy Spirit can work with that, no matter how little it is. All right, and can motivate them to move. And she was being motivated, like before she died, to want to know more and more about Christ. But I didn't see her the last week or so. So who knows? I mean, ultimately, God's going to be fair, and she was seeking. So I don't think about it just because there's no point. So, but the one thing I wanted so just keep in mind, your mom really is alive. All right, I mean, her body may be dead. Her body may be in the grave, but that's still not the end even of her body. Think of when it talks about later about the adoption still waits for us. We are adopted in one sense, but we're still waiting to be adopted, which is at the redemption of the body. Okay. And that happens when Jesus returns. Okay. And so she is waiting, right? So there is a sense where her body is in the ground, but what makes up her is alive. Think about the one when Jesus talked about the rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus was still alive, all right? And even though his body was in the ground, Lazarus was alive. The rich man was alive. They weren't in the same place, but Lazarus was in Abraham's bosom, all right? So he was alive. So your mom is alive, all right? Her body is in the ground, but she is alive. And the way Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4, towards the end of chapter 4, and the way Jesus talks about death in John chapter 11, both of them talk about it the same way. They talk about it as sleep. And I can tell you right now that I really do see death as sleep. All right. So in the beginning, towards the end of chapter 4, Paul says, "But I don't want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep." All right, now he's talking about believers who have died, all right, because he's trying to give encouragement to their friends or their relatives who are now believers, all right, about, well, what's happened to them, all right? And then he goes on to say, hey, when Jesus returns, they're going to be resurrected, and then we're going to follow them, meet Christ in the air, meet them in the air. And then at the end of chapter 4, he says, because of that, therefore, comfort one another with these words. All right, so don't think of your mom as dead. She's not dead. You really have to renew your mind. Think what Paul says, renew your mind. You really have to renew your mind in thinking of death as being asleep. All right, when you go to sleep tonight, apart from the grieving or crying you may have, the next thing you're going to remember is waking up. Well, that's what it's like. All right, that's really what it's going to be like when you die. It's going to be no different than going to sleep. All right, so don't think of it as death. We have to change our mind. Believers have to change their mind because we do have a hope. Because Christ resurrected, our Father in heaven is going to bring us. Christ, remember, he's not just the Lord, but he is our brother. In Hebrews, it talks about him being our brother. All right, so because our Father resurrects one brother, he's not going to leave another brother behind because his nature is love. All right, and then Jesus talking about the resurrection of Lazarus. All right, this is a different Lazarus. All right, but in John chapter 11, that chapter is not about resurrecting a spiritually dead person to become born again. It's about resurrecting believers who are dead. And it's giving Mary and Martha, Jesus is giving Mary and Martha comfort that Lazarus is not going to remain dead. All right, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And the verse that's key important, it says, he that believes in me. So he's talking about Lazarus. Though he were dead, yet shall live. All right, so Jesus is trying to give us comfort. And in the beginning, like in verse 11, he goes, our friend Lazarus, so he's talking to his disciples. He says, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I am going to go and wake him out of his sleep. All right, but then the disciples didn't get it. He said, hey, he's dead. All right, so Lazarus is clearly dead. This is Jesus giving his people comfort. And even unbelievers who want to have comfort about what's going to happen to them after they die, if they become a follower of Jesus, they're going to be woken up. There's nothing to fear. So you can have a hope. And I can tell you, I really, truly, it's not a doctrinal checklist for me. I really, truly know that death really is temporary sleep because I am so utterly convinced. I know that Jesus is coming back and he's going to wake me up. All right. And think of the end of Romans 7. Death, where is your sting? All right. Death has no more sting anymore once you become convinced that really death is just sleep. So what you want to do is ask the Father, if it's not real to you, to change your thinking from death being death to death being sleep. And you still may be grieved over losing your mom, but you won't have this, it won't be the same because you will understand she's just sleeping. I'll see her again. And that goes for any relative. All right. Well, I hope you get some encouragement over this. God bless, man.